In honor of XP Fest, we're going to plow through some NES conversions of arcade games. First up is Dive Kick Simulator 1990, aka Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game. Since it's titled The Arcade Game, TMNT 2 is quite obviously the NES port of the arcade game, which at the time was probably one of the most popular and well-received 4-player arcade machines. And what a port it is. Not only did this port try to faithfully recreate most of the arcade game, it also adds new content and basically made the home port a more official version of a TMNT game. The NES version includes 2 new levels. The first part is Stage 3, which is an all-new winter stage with 2 new enemies, and Stage 6, which is an entirely new stage with entirely new enemies and an entirely new boss. But we'll get to that later. And there are a ton of other changes as well, including extending most every level and changing the Bebop and Rocksteady boss fight to a fight against the mutated fly form of Baxter Stockman. Interestingly enough, this game was also available on the Nintendo PlayChoice 10 arcade system. There's also some cool product placement in this game. Pizza Hut is featured prominently throughout, and the game manual even includes coupons for Pizza Hut, which are now sadly expired. Now, I don't know how sad it is, but they're expired. Of course, TMNT 2 does have a little black eye: the home computer ports. Released by Imageworks and ported by Probe Software in 1991, TMNT 2 saw home releases on the ZX Spectrum, Amiga, Amstrad CPC, Atari ST, DOS, and Commodore 64. As you might be able to imagine, these ports weren't quite up to par with the NES version. To me, the NES version is the second best version of the game. While I do love the game, my heart really does belong to the original upright cabinet. If only I could afford one. Well, it's no use dwelling on what I don't have. What I do have is the NES version, and by God did I beg my dad for this one. I remember one excuse I used was that, Dad, I wouldn't have to ask for any more quarters when we go to the restaurant. He smiled at me and said, Son, you really are an asshole, aren't you? Just like Dad. Just like Dad. Still, I managed to beat the game a total of 1 time as a kid, and I can beat it again. You start the game off by picking your turtle, and we're going with Donatello here for no particular reason, and head off to save April O'Neil, who's in a burning apartment building. Before we get to the levels, though, we need to discuss a couple of quirks that this game inherited. Much like its arcade cousin, the NES port suffers from the bad beat-em-up mechanics. There are only 2 buttons, attack and jump, and this game really is unfair when it comes to the enemy AI. Basically, don't bother attacking. Using your main weapon might seem cool and useful, and hey, look at that, I'm Raphael with the sai, I'm Donatello with the bow, but it's not, and you'll only end up getting your ass kicked. So, don't. Instead, you, my reptilian wannabe wasabi, must learn the ways of the dive kick. Ah, yes, the dive kick. It is both a blessing and a curse. For starters, you just can't dive kick all willy-nilly. The foot soldiers will just punch you out of the air and send you flying. Instead, one must dive kick at the appropriate time, neither too soon nor too late. Realistically speaking, you want to dive kick when you're pretty close to the enemy. Too early, and they just counterattack. Too late, and you won't get your kick off, and then they punch you in the face. And well, you know, that sucks. It takes some practice, but eventually you should be able to master the art of the dive kick. You might think, oh, but that's just cheesing the game. To an extent, you're right, but as you'll see later on, this is the only reliable method for taking out some of the bosses, and quite frankly, taking out some of the enemies as well. When you're getting frustrated, there's also an uppercut move you can use by simply tapping A, then rapidly following that by tapping B. In the arcade game, you could hit them at the same time and perform the uppercut move, but in the NES version, it's kind of wonky. You need to offset the B button by about half a second, otherwise you just end up jumping in the air and it doesn't work right. With that out of the way, let's get on to the levels. Level 1, the apartment building, is an apartment building, and it's on fire. And you're going to go in it and save April O'Neil. Unfortunately, there are a lot of enemies in your way. Now, the enemies aren't all that dangerous or complicated. The big problem here is the length of the level. Most stages are broken up into 2 or 3 parts. This stage has no breaks and gives you no mercy. You'll start off facing against regular foot soldiers, those guys in the purple. They're pretty easy to deal with once you start to figure out that the dive kick is the only real viable attack. Later on, you'll run into a bunch of blue foot soldiers who do nothing but attack with knives. They're slightly more annoying, but don't punch as often, so your dive kicks are more likely to land, instead of you being swatted away like a turtle fly. Their knives aren't particularly deadly unless you get caught between 2 of the knife soldiers, so just dive kick to your heart's content. Oh, and there are gigantic metal balls hurling down the stairs ready to squash you. You're going to want to do your best to avoid those. The white foot soldiers are armed with katanas and offer you your first real problem with dive kicking. Some attacks will just plain fuck you up. The katana dive is one such attack. It takes precedence over your dive kick, so be careful. There are also the red machine gun wielding foot soldiers, but again, they're not too terrible to deal with. Occasionally you'll get shot out of the air, but more often than not the dive kick will take these guys out. Hey, Roadkill Rodneys are in this game. How cool is that? They have the same attacks as their arcade counterparts, namely shooting lasers and whipping out an arm that electrocutes you. The only problem with these guys is the fact that they come in groups of 3. Dive kicking works, but there are times when you're going to get caught between a couple of them and get electrocuted. The boss of this level, Rocksteady, and we're going to follow the standard boss killing procedure for the rest of this game: dive kick and jump away. Your basic strategy for every boss in this game, and Rocksteady, is to dive kick when they're ready to attack, and then after you hit them, quickly jump away. Rocksteady is no exception. Occasionally, he will move to one side of the screen and then charge at you. There's nothing you can do here except stay out of Rocksteady's way, as he's invulnerable during this phase. He also fires his gun. Just avoid the bullets until he's done and continue your dive kick adventure to victory. Level 2 is broken into 2 parts, the streets and the sewers. The streets are fairly simple, but a little long. There's also only one new enemy in this stage, the yellow foot soldiers who throw boomerangs. There really isn't much to explain about these guys other than avoid the boomerangs, kill the foot soldiers, and move on. The boss of this stage is Bebop, and he's pretty much Rocksteady version 2. Just dive kick and jump to safety until you murder his white meat. The sewers are a bit tougher, only because the water spawns ground-to-air missiles, and the rest of the level is crowded with foot soldiers, falling gates, and, well, basically death. You'll run into most of the different types of foot soldiers here, and a new variety, the dark purple hammer-wielding foot soldiers. Fortunately, these guys are a bust. They have no defense whatsoever against the dive kick. Another new twist in this level is the introduction of Mouser. Mousers chew through the wall and spawn at a very fast rate. Your best method for dealing with them is to hit them as soon as they spawn, then turn around and hit them again. Repeat until they stop spawning. The boss here is Baxter Stockman, who flies around in his hovercraft and drops Mousers on you. The fight isn't difficult, it's just long and annoying. Dive kicking Baxter Stockman is an easy way to damage him, but he has a lot of health and he spawns a ton of Mousers. If you're not vigilant, you'll be overrun by Mousers and die a slow, painful death. But if you manage to control the Mouser population and keep dive kicking old Baxter, you'll make it through this fight in good condition. Level 3 is next, and it starts off in the now infamous Snowfield, the first new segment that was added to the NES version. This part of the game is pretty easy, although there are a couple of new enemies to keep your eyes peeled for. First is Frosty the Hitman, which is a robot covered in snow. It bounces around and fires missiles at you, and takes about 4 dive kicks to take them out. They can do a good amount of damage with their missiles before you take them out, so your main focus should be on attacking these guys as quickly as possible. There are also light blue foot soldiers who show up in this level, and their special attack? Snowballs. No, I'm not kidding. These guys basically are a minor recolor of the knife soldiers. Just dive kick them to extinction. There are a couple of segments in this stage you'll want to pay close attention to, the falling ice and the snowplows. Falling ice will appear as a small shadow on the screen, just avoid walking under it. The The snowplows show up on the scenes where there are no fluff on screen, benches, plants, etc. They just plow on by with total disregard for the mutated turtle in front of it, stay to the top of the screen to avoid getting plowed over. The boss of this level is Tora, and I quote, 10-foot-tall, half-ton blizzard beast who, in 2,000 years, has never known defeat. If you're a TMNT fan, then you know this guy didn't exist until the NES game. Not that I care, it's just a little interesting trivia for you geeks out there. Tora is a standard boss who has one little trick. He loves to throw ice balls at you. Ice balls that you can't take down, and that knock off 1 bar of health at a time. Here's a little pro tip. Avoid the ice blocks. They fucking hurt. The rest of the boss fight is more dive kicking practice for your viewing pleasure. The next stage is the parking lot, and aside from exploding barrels and cars that'll run you over, this is just your standard level. Go through the foot soldiers, get to the boss. Instead of facing off against both Bebop and Rocksteady like you do in the arcade version, you're just going up against the mutated form of Baxter Stockman. He's almost exactly the same as when you faced him in the sewers. The difference here is that he's not dropping mousers to gnaw at your ankles. Instead, he has a new laser attack that will put you on your ass if you're not careful. The basic dive kick works really well, but you have to pay attention to when Baxter moves into attack, otherwise you're going to end up burning through your lives. Stage 4 takes us to the freeway in search of the secret foot soldier factory. This one is filled with a ton of foot soldiers, including soldiers that carry bombs, ones that jump out of tires, soldiers on motorcycles, and spear-wielding foot soldiers. The spear-wielding foot soldiers can be a bit of a pain in the ass. They can attack upwards, knocking you out of your dive kick. This is where proper timing for the dive kick comes in very handy. If you hit your kick at the right time, the foot soldiers can't hit you with their spears. If you're having a hard time timing your kicks, though, try your uppercut on these guys. Oh, and one more thing. Watch out for the cars that cruise by. They do the same nonsense that the snowplows did. Both the bomb and the tire soldiers are basically one-shot deals. The bombs get thrown and blow up, causing big damage, and the tires get thrown, knocking you back. Both type of soldiers, though, revert to the basic purple foot soldier once their main attack is used up. The foot soldiers on motorcycles really aren't that much of a threat so much as something cool they threw into the game. They just drive by and try to run you over. It's not really a big deal. Dive kick them or ignore them and move on. The freeway doesn't end with a boss. It just takes you to the awesome skateboard stage. This one is really basic. Be awesome and dive kick the living hell out of the foot soldiers and helicopters. This game will basically throw every type of foot soldier at you. Just keep dive kicking and conserve your health. You don't get a pizza for a very long while yet. Level 5 is a long one, almost as long as level 1, and you don't get a pizza until well after your first boss encounter. There are some rapid-fire laser pulls in this level, which are pretty easy to avoid. Just jump over the very predictable pattern and hit them from behind. The first boss in Level 5, after a long slog through the factory, is Sergeant Granitor, the second-in-command of the Rock Soldiers. Now, this guy is a pain in the ass. You see, the Rock Soldiers have this uppercut move that you can't avoid once you dive kick, which means you're going to get punched in the face almost every time you try to attack. Unless you learn a little secret. The Rock Soldiers can't move very well. Once you land a dive kick, immediately move down. In most cases, you should be able to avoid his uppercut. You'll also need to be able to avoid his gun attack, but after a while, you should be able to take down Granitor. Level 6 is the completely new level for the NES version. It's the Shogun Hideout. It's really not all that impressive. In case you're wondering, the game manual states that the Shogun are hired mercenaries. just in case you cared. The blades in this level, a new enemy, are really a joke. Just dive kick them and move on. What's really difficult are Vincent Van Growls. These white tigers can eat all of the dicks. I hate enemies like this. They change the rules to make them artificially difficult. You can't dive kick old Vinny here. The game simply doesn't allow it. In order to kill this tiger, you've got to use your basic attack. Timing is key here. If you time it correctly, you can use your attack over and over again to take out Vincent Van Growl. Screw up your timing, though, and the tiger will jump up and hit you in the head. Once you get past the tigers, though, there are only blades and foot soldiers to get by before you take on the third hardest boss in the game, Shogun. This boss, much like every other boss, can be taken out with dive kicks. However, his head comes off and flies around like a cock-blocking son of a bitch. You can't hit it, and it does good damage. Basically, the trick here is to just wait until you have an opening, and then dive kick until you have to avoid the head again. Repeat until you win. Level 7 is the Technodrome, and this is actually a really short level with 3 different bosses. That's right, you get to go up against 3 bosses in this level. The first boss is General Trag. He fights just like Granitor did. Dive kick, walk down, and fight your way to the teleporter. Boss number 2, Krang. What a goddamn pain in the ass. I can't even begin to tell you how much of a nightmare dealing with Krang is. He's in his bionic suit, and damn, you are gonna die. A lot. Up until this point, the game has been relatively tame. Just dive kick your way to victory. While that remains a basic truth here, Krang does not play nice. We have 3 major attacks to deal with: the kick, the laser blast, and the rocket punch. All 3 attacks are easy enough to dodge on their own, but the various combinations that Krang has makes this one a wee bit difficult to deal with. My method for dealing with Krang is simple. Get Krang down to the bottom of the screen so there's no variation in the 2D plane you both are on, then dive kick him, then jump away, dive kicking over his head to get away back to your original position. If you don't jump away or you try to get another dive kick in, you are just going to get kicked in the nuts. You don't want to get kicked in the nuts. Once you jump away, one of 2 attacks will happen, either a laser beam or a rocket punch. The laser beam is great because that means you can jump right in, dive kick, and then jump away again. The rocket punch is not so great. More often than not, I end up getting punched in the ass when Krang decides to use his rocket punch, but on the occasions that I don't, I end up getting nailed by his immediate follow-up attack to every rocket punch, his lasers. This pattern is annoying. Now there's one more pattern, a laser blast followed by a rocket punch, but that really doesn't matter, because once Krang fires a laser, you should be jumping in and kicking Krang in the sternum. Here's how the Krang fight works if you don't have some incredibly stupid good reflexes. Bring Krang down to the bottom of the screen. When Krang fires a laser, jump in and dive kick him, then jump away. When he fires a rocket punch, wait for the follow-up laser shot, and then dive kick. Repeat until you get to Shredder. You know, for as pain in the ass as Krang was, Shredder really wasn't all that bad of a boss. In the NES version, Shredder splits into 2, a real and a fake version, and takes on the Turtles. This is contrary to the arcade version, where Shredder splits up into a fake Shredder for each person playing. That's a maximum of 5 Shredders on the screen at once. Thankfully, we only have to deal with 2 Shredders. The pattern here is very basic. Every time you jump over Shredder's head, the Shredders will swap 2D planes. Dive kick the Shredders until the first one loses his helmet. This is the fake Shredder and should be avoided. If you kill him, the fight will reset. Really, the entire fight is just this. Of course, there's some bullshit thrown in here and there. Shredder has an insta-kill move where he backs up into a corner of the screen and throws some Force Lightning bullshit at you that turns you into a turtle and instantly kills you. Yeah, I don't know where he got the ability. I don't care. I just know it's complete horseshit. Avoiding the lightning attack is easy if you stay on top of Shredder. He will run to one side of the screen, and you'd best be on that side of the screen or you're screwed. Just keep at it. Eventually, you'll get the best of the Shredder, and you'll win. Thanks to our Patreon supporters, Salsa Bear Studios at salsabearstudios.com, Sanguine Games at sanguinegames.com, Power Gamer at powergamer.co, Carlos Antonio, Times at twitter.com/timesgamer, The Enforcer, twitter.com/180enforcer, and Jimpan666 at twitter.com/Jimpan666. Also thanks to Suicune, Mossat, Anton, and Embrasion for your continued support. And thank you at the $5, $10, and $20 levels and the unselected support levels, patreon.com/LordCat. And please, check out our convention. We love retro games, we love video games, we love tabletop games, xpfest.com.